You're listening to QSBS Solved, where we share insights for founders and investors looking to maximize their business's growth, exit opportunities, and tax savings. Our team at QSBS-Rollover.com offers specialized services to help you benefit from owning qualified small business stock. Our podcast guests are leaders in their respective fields and work on every side of the startup journey to help founders and investors win. The ideas and opinions shared here are not investment, tax, or legal advice. Reach out and we'd be happy to connect you with a qualified advisor or tax counsel. For now, enjoy today's episode. You're listening to QSBS Solved, presented by QSBSrollover.com. We feature audio versions of our most popular articles and insights, as well as exclusive interviews with professionals who live and breathe QSBS. You can find articles, rollover opportunities, planning mock-ups, and more at QSBSrollover.com. Hey, Michael, thanks so much for joining today to chat about trust and estate planning for founders.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we worked together a decent amount in the past, kind of passing founders back and forth where we can solve maybe distinct different problems. And what I realized the other day is I talk about trust and I talk about estate planning on a very high level with some founders I speak with, but I actually don't know all that much about it. And so I thought bringing you on to share together about that point in time where founders start to really have to think about maybe liquidity events in the future, what a windfall could look for them and their estate, for their family, for maybe a future family. Because in the past, when I think estate planning, I think older people. And that's not the right way to think about it, but I imagine that a lot of people do. And so excited to chat with you about what this means for founders.
Absolutely. Yeah. I enjoyed collaborating with you. And I think in the world of QSBS, there's what I do, which we can broadly call stacking. There's what you do, which is rollovers. And then the other piece of it, I think, is this sort of what I believe is sometimes called packing strategy, where you build up your basis and then you convert and you try and do 10 times basis. And those are all complementary strategies. And founders should know about and be doing all three of them. They're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah. Well, let's start on the trust side. And you guys have a ton of resources for founders, from sort of inception of their company and issuance of shares, thinking about 83Bs, RSUs for employees, option pools for employees. Obviously, a lot of resources at your firm at Patterson Belknap to deal with all of those points in time. But tell us about when a founder should start thinking about estate planning and start thinking about maybe moving some of their equity to trust, if that's a part of the planning process, and maybe then just high level what both of those things mean.
Absolutely. And so just to clarify, our focus, founder focus, which is the name of our practice, is really focused on the personal legal needs of founders. So we work complementary with company counsel because we don't really compete. We're not looking to represent, the board of directors of the company. We're providing personal legal services to the founder. And the cornerstone of that really is trust and tax planning. And you're right, traditional estate planning is really something people do, like eating spinach. It's sort of like, we had a baby, we got to do our wills. And then maybe older people later on in life I don't know if anyone gets excited, but they get more excited about estate tax planning, meaning minimizing the tax that applies when you die. But younger people are just not really excited about any of that. So what I'm focused on with founders is really saving income taxes, letting you keep more of the money when you sell your business. Kind of same as you with the rollovers, but a different angle. And it comes down to, Section 1202, QSBS. Roughly speaking, QSBS allows you to pay no tax on $10 million. But because of the way the tax code is written, you can stack QSBS, which basically means creating additional $10 million exemptions. And traditionally, you do that using trusts. And there's two flavors of trust or big picture strategies there. There's creating trust for other people. That's what I'll call traditional stacking. So founder comes to me, a spouse and two kids. My go-to move there would be, hey, you've got three other people in your core family. Let's create a special kind of trust for each of your kids. Let's create one for your spouse, and let's give some shares into those trusts. And let's design those trusts so that each trust can sell up to 10 million tax-free. So now as a family of four, you've gone from 10 million to 40 million tax-free. And there are other benefits. If you live in a high tax state, like New York, say, those trusts can also be designed after the first 10 million to pay no state level income tax. Those trusts can be designed all for the traditional estate planning benefit, ultimately of creating a tax-free multi-generational inheritance. The one problem with those strategies is that it requires the founder to give money away to someone else. Now, those someone else's are often their spouse and children who they love dearly. And many founders are willing to do that. But there are some founders, certainly single founders, but also some married founders who are really just unsure about the size of the liquidity event they're going to have, or they just don't have anyone that, we can create trusts for future children, but do you really want to do that? What if you don't end up having children? You've kind of given wealth away or value away to people that don't exist. Or you're not sure if you're going to have a $20 million exit or a $100 million exit. And so you're not really sure that you want to give your actual real live kids or your spouse a share of the wealth, knowing there's divorce risk and risk your spouse passes away. So the other flavor of strategies are strategies where the founder can create trusts and therefore stack QSBS in a way where they can maintain the optionality of also being a beneficiary of the trust. This is sort of the holy grail, right? Where it's like, hey, I want to create another 10 or 20 million tax-free, but I don't want to give that to someone else. I want that to be for me. And we do have solutions there. They're more complicated solutions. They require, for example, setting the trust up in what's known as an asset protection jurisdiction, like a Delaware or a Nevada or South Dakota. But we do have ways of structuring that. And for a single founder, which is, at least half, if not more, of the founders I deal with are young people that are not married, have no children. They love that because I can say to them, look, you can set this up. Worst case scenario, you can get all the money back. Best case scenario, you do end up having kids. You don't touch the money. It grows in a way that eventually creates an enormous inheritance for your children a long time from now. So that's the big picture on the universe of trust strategies. There's a lot of details embedded there.
Yeah, that's good. Good high level overview. And I think the main consideration, I guess, is what does liquidity look like? You said you can get that, or one of the main considerations, you say you can get that money back. Is there sort of an expiration date, say on a trust that you set up for future kids that you don't actually end up having? Then that money comes back, and what does liquidity look like if you actually do set up, say you have, a 10-year-old child and a spouse and you set up two different trusts, what does liquidity look like? Maybe assuming that couple shares their finances freely and things like that.
So when they're people you're creating trusts for, like children, suffice it to say that you can always, there's no world in which your kids will like be able to get money before you want them to be able to get money. And so you can always design trusts where the creator of the trust essentially has, at a minimum, indirect control over. So you have no concerns about that. Every trust does need to have real live beneficiaries. So typically the way that we would handle someone who's like, you know what, I'm engaged, I'm likely to have kids in the next 5 years. I don't have them yet, but I do want to create some trust for my future kids. We need to have placeholder beneficiaries. So it's very simple. We create a trust for your sister and her kids, and we have an automatic provision in the trust that says as soon as your first child is born, your sister and her kids basically get booted out of the trust. They're no longer beneficiaries, and now it's for your child. That kind of a trust is really got to be used for the child. So certainly things like paying for your kids' education, college, private school, that's easy. The joke I tell is, if you want to get granular and every time you go out to dinner with your kid, you want to pay for their chicken fingers out of their trust, you can split the check. Okay.
Nice.
I do get questions like, hey, can my kids buy me a house, right? Can my kids buy me a beach house? And I think, if you're a family of 4, I don't think your kids can just buy the house and then you just sort of live there. I think the IRS would sort of say, hey, you're kind of using your kid's trust in an inappropriate way, and that could jeopardize tax benefits. But if you're a family of 4, I have no problem if your kid's trust pays for half the house. You have 2 kids, that's 50% of the family. And then you and your spouse pay for the other 50%. Or if you did one of the spouse trusts, maybe that trust pays for 25%. So you can definitely benefit and use the capital in those trusts in a way that benefits the family as a whole. For the other strategies where the founder himself or herself is also a beneficiary, those trusts always, for tax reasons, require that another beneficiary has to approve the founder's access. So, for example, the founder might create a trust for herself and her parents, and then to get access, the parents would have to basically sign off and say, we agree that we're going to allow our daughter to take some money out of this trust. So there are some risks there if you become estranged from family members and things like that.
Borrowing from the trust can say a parent take a loan from a child's trust at, I assume it would have to be marked.
Certainly. Yeah. But there are restrictions. Again, everything I say is tax driven. There are restrictions on the founder borrowing from any of these trusts. Essentially, the loan would have to be secured, adequately secured, which who knows what that means, but often like securing a loan is annoying. Like the founder's not going to like put a mortgage on their house to borrow from the trust. So practically speaking, I think borrowing is a little bit of a challenge.
Okay. Yeah, and I can recognize why trust, it might be difficult for, say, a single founder, no kids, to, decide on trust planning for maybe their equity that they expect to appreciate and maybe hasn't yet. Maybe it can be a difficult step to see the value in trust, but for a family, it's almost seems like almost a no-brainer to at least utilize trust in some capacity and with some amount of the money, if not, all of it as total funding strategy.
I think for single people though, the math is always amazing, right? Like if you live in New York City, creating a full QSBS exemption saves you $3.5 million.
Yeah.
So let's say I told you that between my fees and the fees of a trust company, et cetera, you would have to spend, $50,000, just making that up, over the course of a few years to save $3.5 million. for most people, that's literally the best investment, the best IRR they will make in their entire life. And even if you discount that and say, well, liquidity, like what if the company goes to zero? They never have an exit. Even probability adjusted, like these strategies are all no brainers, which is why my phone rings off the hook of people who want to hire me to implement these strategies.
Yeah, I liked how you called sort of maybe the three different buckets of ways that people plan for QSBS, including trust and estate planning, QSBS rollovers, and basis packing, which we won't talk a ton about today, but how they're sort of complementary. And I see them being complementary in like one really specific way. And that's that with your trust planning, the way that you're expanding the QSBS cap is by creating additional shareholders, right? Because for each shareholder, that shareholder is granted its own $10 million exclusion cap. So you get one for your trust, one for you as an individual, maybe one for a third trust. So $30 million total. The other way that you can create another exclusion cap is by making additional investments, because the exclusion cap comes per company issuing investments, but also per shareholder. And so one way to accomplish what Michael's talking about outside of a trust structure is to do a QSBS rollover. And so take some of that money after the sale and invest it in a new business or a new business that you want to start. And so, for instance, for single founders, maybe where the trusts are part of the planning, but don't take care of all of the planning, rollovers can accomplish a similar thing in expanding that QSBS cap. And then actually, once that money is back in your hand tax-free, then you can look at or trust and estate planning as well. Maybe you're farther down the line. Maybe you've gotten married at that point. And so timing does timing matter all that much when some of this happens? Obviously, we know that it matters for planning around QSBS, moving those shares before your sale. But afterwards, say I did rollovers, and now on the other side of that, I want to do planning with trusts.
A lot there. So first of all, going back to something earlier in your comment, when you create these trusts, we're talking about, as you said, they're not company specific. So I have clients who are serial entrepreneurs that created a set of trusts with me for their first company. Let's say they have 3 kids and a spouse, and maybe even, some parents, and they created a series of, let's say, 5 trusts. And now every time they found a new company, they put those 5 trusts on day one on the cap table. So they kind of start off with 60 million instead of 10 million every time they found a company. Every time they make a significant angel investment, they can spread that angel investment among their, complex of entities. And I think that is to your point, these trusts are not specific to one company. You can make additional investments. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. The other question you asked was what?
Yeah. So when it's okay. Say someone does a rollover, and they maybe it was a single founder, and they decide just weren't for them for whatever reason at that time, and they did a rollover. You got on the other side.
You asked about time. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Could they then set up a trust? I assume after that.
Sorry about that. So timing, yes, timing is important. Every single strategy that I've mentioned so far involves making a gift. And obviously, gifts are limited. Most people are aware there's a gifting exemption, which is around 14 million. And so the time sensitivity is around the valuation of the stock that you're going to put into the trusts. And so sort of the earlier, the better. I use the example of the guy who every time he creates a new company, he puts some stock into the trust. Well, that stock is probably worth pretty much close to zero.
Right.
But a lot of times founders, are doing their first trust planning with their first company. They're reluctant to spend the money to set up the trusts. They're unsure about the size of their outcome. And they are sort of torn about how long to wait, right? The longer they wait, the more visibility they have, the more they feel good about the success of their company, that they're not wasting the money doing this trust planning. But the longer they wait, the higher the value of the shares, the more of their gifting exemption they'll have to use. And there's an opportunity cost with that. The answer is people are all over the place, but I see a lot of people after they take their first secondary, typically after a Series B, because then they have some money in their pocket. They have a company that they think is not going to be a zero, and they set up the trust and estates planning at that point, which is a perfectly fine time to do it. I mean, I see people who set up the structures on day one, and I see people who do it literally like they're getting term sheets and, trying to do the planning, which is not ideal.
Sure. Yeah.
But possible.
Okay. Well, that sort of leads into my another part of that question, which is the folks that reach out to us, founders that reach out to us, have one of two problems. Either they've sold their stock before holding it for 5 years for QSBS purposes, and rollovers are functionally the only solution to handle that, if that's the case. But the other set of people that reaches out is about to have a very large exit, well in excess of $10 million, and maybe they've held their stock for 6 or 7 years, so the holding period isn't an issue. And most of the time, they have a term sheet, they're very deep in the process and are likely about to get one. So are you saying up until you close, as long as you're able to move those shares to a trust structure before the close happens, you're good to go? Or is that not the way to think about it? You don't want to.
Good to go is all relative. So the legal standard, right? So what we're worried about is two things. One is a valuation issue. The closer you get to a fully done deal, the more likely the IRS would come in and sort of seek to value the shares at the transaction price rather than, sort of the private company, let's call it 409A price, right?
I see.
And so if you make a certain gift and you're expecting to use $10 million of your gifting exemption, you don't want the IRS to come back and say, we think you used 20 million because there's a 40% tax above 14 million of your gifting exemption. And so you don't want to do that. And then there even is a point where it's too late, meaning the IRS would be like, we're not even going to recognize that these trusts, independent of you, have their own QSBS. That's called anticipatory assignment of income, where the deal is so far along that basically you attempted to shift your income into the trusts, but the IRS is like, no, we're going to assign that income back to you, and therefore you don't get the benefits of the stacking. Legally, the standard is sort of the point of no return is when there aren't any more material issues. Essentially, the deal is fully baked. It's going to happen. And maybe there's some closing period of time, but everything's been negotiated and agreed upon.
Yeah.
You don't want to come up to that line if you can avoid it. But there, often in these deals, right up to the very end when the merger agreement is signed, there's significant material issues that aren't agreed on. Deals can fall apart right up to the last minute.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking from the founder's perspective, which is there's no such thing as a fully baked, a big deal. So
yeah. So we don't love to do it. It would be better to do the planning months in advance before you even got a term sheet. But we're often doing the deal during due diligence. And what I think is a good practice would be if on the day that you gift your shares into the trusts, you should make a list and memorialize in an email, on this day, we are still unagreed. Is that a word? Unagreed, not agreed on the following material terms, just really have a memo setting forth what the status of the deal is. So that's the reality. Look, in an ideal world, people would do all their planning, years in advance, but we do it all the time, in the throes of a deal.
Well, and that's why the awareness is important, because sometimes people just literally don't know that the opportunity exists out there.
Yeah.
We talked to some folks a couple of weeks ago, two different founders who were post their sale and at like day 57 of their 60-day rollover window. And it's like,
Yeah.
we wish we had seen you maybe 10 days sooner. We can do it, but are you going to diligence some of these opportunities?
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because one of the things that we really excel at is working very, very quickly. Like I've many, many times gotten trusts, drafted and funded with shares in a 24-hour period. And like,
That's great.
for most lawyers, that's unheard of. And there's very few areas of trust and estates law where being able to do things quickly is like there are very few trust and estates lawyers who could walk around being like, I'm the fastest trust and estates lawyer around, But when I'm working with founders, like sometimes no one else can do what I can do. Like no one else they're just like, no, I'm not going to drop everything and like get your trust done in 24 hours. Like I need 3 weeks. I need 6 weeks to get it done. And so that's a real advantage for my practice, which is funny because speed is not something generally lawyers are promoting as one of their characteristics.
And if you're not working with people in this situation, it's like, hey, I'm 55 years old and let's get these trusts done before I'm 60 or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Most people would not care about speed.
Sure. That's great. Yeah. That's a big part of our side of the rollover planning as well, because there's that 60-day time crunch that a founder is under once they exit their shares. They have 60 days to roll over their proceeds. So for us in our business, it's sort of a helpful catalyst because it gets our clients to move quickly and have some urgency as well, but it also puts us under the gun in this situation. So yeah, totally with that.
I want to mention something else. I don't know if you were talking about it, but one kind of cool thing about rollovers that know about, but I didn't always know about, and it ties into funding trusts, is sort of the idea that that I always thought of rollovers like you mentioned, like, hey, you didn't hit the 5 years, so you need to roll over into something to wait out so you can get to the 5 years. But what I didn't realize is that you can do a rollover even for stock that's already past the 5 years. And the effect of doing that is twofold. One is that you don't end up paying tax on what otherwise would be a gain, meaning like if you've already used your 10 million, let's say you have $20 million of stock, you've held it for 7 years,
Right.
you sell the $20 million of stock, you pay no tax on the 10. The next 10, if you do a rollover with that, you also would pay no tax on it. And this is the cool part in my view, the new investment, you don't have to hold for another 5 years. You basically immediately could have an exit on that in 2 years or 3 years. Now, most entrepreneurial things don't exit that quickly, but it would be very helpful. And so in the trust planning world, here's something that I do, which is kind of interesting, is sometimes when a client is a serial entrepreneur and they are going to capitalize a new business, they're starting a new company. And normally, they would say, okay, we're all going to put our money in this company. And then we would have to wait 5 years and then we all get our 10 million tax free. But if that company was being capitalized with rollover proceeds, then the company, no one would have to wait the 5 years. And I'm seeing a lot of like AI companies where these things are getting sold like in 2 to 3 years for massive amounts. So how do you pull that off? Like, okay, one way is if you're one of the few fortunate people whose company went public and you're sitting on a boatload of public company stock, then it's pretty easy. What you would do is you take a couple shares. That's all it would take, or even one share of your public company stock. and you gift it into a trust. The trust then sells on the public market that share, elects rollover treatment, and invests it in the new, in your new co. Okay, so that's almost too easy. There aren't that many people I see that have boatloads of public company stock. But let's say you have a private company, it hasn't liquidated yet, or you're sitting on a bunch of private company stock. I once had a guy who essentially did exactly the same thing. What he did was he gifted one share, let's say, of his existing private company into a trust that he created, and he was going to use that trust to capitalize a new business. And how did he get liquidity? There's people who might buy that one share, right? Maybe a friend of yours is like, "Hey, can you buy this one share from my trust for $100?" It's a little weird and annoying, and I know that selling private company stock, involves approval sometimes. But if you did that, I think, and your friend paid your trust $100, arm's length, fair market value, then you could kind of engineer a rollover into your new business and just sort of do away with the 5-year holding period. So we think creatively like that about stuff.
Yeah, we call it seasoning, QSBS seasoning, and it's actually really interesting. Something that we've thought of at maybe say a venture fund who has had some distributions to their LPs, and the LPs are interested in continuing to be involved in that fund, but that fund is closed and they maybe haven't set up, call it Fund B, Fund 2, for an entity to get created and for those LP distributions or even whatever amount of distribution it was to go into that entity. And maybe it's another year before investments are ready to be made. If they can demonstrate that they're actively pursuing investment, it's possible that say 1 year or year and a half, however long that rollover investment was sitting there, could continue its QSBS period into the second fund.
Yeah.
So like sort of acting as a bridge between the holding period you got in Fund 1 and the holding period you got in Fund 2, even though that second fund wasn't set up for investment yet.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's a lot of really cool engineering that you can do, both with trusts and with rollovers. But I wonder, and a lot of that stuff we actually, typically have to bring to founders. They're not coming to us with that knowledge. And so that's some of the value add. But what are the maybe two or three, however many there are, main questions that founders come to you asking? Or is it kind of, hey, I saw something about this, tell me what I can do?
Yeah.
Or is there a specific pain point or question that founders ask?
Yeah, I definitely get the same questions over and over again. In fact, I try and, when I do my sort of windy spiel, I try and answer a lot of those questions. Look, one question is timing, which we already talked about. Everyone loves to be told, "Oh, you don't need to worry about this right now." So I try to be very honest with founders about, whether they need to take action now, what the costs and benefits of taking action are versus waiting. But, timing is a very important element of what I'm asked about. I get questions, as I said before, around, and then you asked about, you called it liquidity, but like sort of access. Like, okay, if I do this, what can I use this money for? Can I buy the beach house, that I'm going to use? What are the risks? Like, what happens if I get divorced? If I don't, you asked a bunch of questions like this. If I don't end up having kids, can I just kind of cancel the whole thing and take the money back? And so people are, super interested about that. And I think just broadly speaking, control, like, what sort of voting control? Like, once I put the shares in these entities, like who votes that stock? And post liquidity, like, do I get to pick the investments? Do I get to decide when my kids get the money? And the answers to all of those questions are not, I mean, they're straightforward answers, but the answer is not like, yes, you control everything. You get to make all the decisions.
Right.
Basically, the answer is, you have to operate through, there has to be another person makes those decisions, but at all times you can fire and replace that person. So you have indirect control, not direct control. And most people get comfortable with that when I tell them they need to in order to save millions of dollars of taxes.
Yeah, I think something that's interesting about folks coming to us and trying to mitigate tax is you're always going to sacrifice something. If you're going to save on tax, you're going to sacrifice control, maybe indefinitely, maybe for a specific period of time, or there's going to be a very high cost to that tax planning. But in circumstances around QSBS, even if the cost of the planning is high, which you sort of describe the value proposition, someone saving $3.5 million. Well, I mean, the cost could be up to $2 million. If they have no other options and they're still saving $1.5 million, that's still an amazing trade. What is that? A 70%, 75% return?
I wish I could charge $2 million to do the planning, but
especially around QSBS, and I'm sure it's different with other types of gains and other exemptions that folks could be pursuing. But with QSBS, where you're not only dealing with deferred gains, but the possibility of exclusion, running all of these things to ground and getting comfortable with either lack of access or lack of control for certain periods of time, or just the minutia that maybe turns people off initially, it's worth running to ground for sure and getting to the bottom of what all the options are, whether it's trust stacking, trust and estate planning,
for sure,
or rollovers. The numbers are just too big to ignore, especially in New York, where you and I obviously focus a lot, because not every state recognizes QSBS at the state level. And so, for instance, in California, if you're exiting a company and paying taxes in California, you'll still be on the hook for the California gains tax, which is substantial, but you'll still likely be able to exclude that almost $2.4 million federal tax bill for 10.
Yeah.
So New York is an amazing place for QSBS.
No, it is. I mean, I think New Jersey and Pennsylvania are two other states that don't have a state level QSBS, which is...
The move to Manhattan is that's
it's kind of weird. Yeah, there are a couple other trust strategies I just want to mention to fill out the picture, which are what I'll call the non-gift strategies. I'm sure any founders who have done their ChatGPT, or asked around will learn about, there's sort of one called the ING strategy. There's one called the CRT, or charitable remainder trust strategy. These are both non-gift strategies, meaning that you're not making a gift that's going to use that $14 million exemption. Therefore, these are what I'll call late-stage strategies, meaning you don't have to worry about doing them early because you're not making a gift. And these are also strategies that are conducive to a founder creating some benefits for himself or herself. These strategies are edgy, meaning they're not strategies that are where the IRS has issued a ruling saying these 100%, work. So they're strategies that involve interpretations of the tax code, but we do them all the time and they're part of the playbook. The other thing I want to mention is something I call the GOAT trust, GOAT. It's a little acronym we made up, play on words, greatest of all time, but actually stands for gift optimized to alleviate taxes. And this is, again, another strategy that we, Founder Focus sort of perfected, which is designed to solve the problem of the founder who wants tax benefits but doesn't want to give anything away to anyone else. And long story short, this is a strategy that is a very, very early stage strategy. In fact, it pretty much needs to be implemented contemporaneously with the formation of the company. Big picture, it allows someone else, typically, let's say the founder's parents, to create a trust for their benefit. The founder's the beneficiary, the founder is the trustee, controls, has full access. The trust receives a gift from the parents, comes onto the cap table on day one, paying, fair market value, which is typically nothing, a couple bucks for some shares. And in that way, the founder basically clones themselves on the cap table. And sometimes we do multiple, grandma can create a trust for you, your uncle can create a trust for you. And so it's all about sort of starting off the company with stacking already in place.
Wow. And so is that like if a founder comes to you and they're saying, hey, I'm in the process of capitalizing a new business or starting a new business, is that sort of standard now for you guys in terms of, hey, let's
Standard
get
for
some,
us. Yeah. I don't know if anyone else is doing this or I don't know who's doing it.
I guess when I say standard, you would recommend it almost across the board.
It's a no-brainer because
Sure.
sort of like, it's the GOAT, man.
Yes.
It's the best trust strategy we've got because you create tax benefits and you don't give up control and you don't give up access to the money. So you get everything you want.
Has to be done though basically at formation.
Or I guess we're super rich.
Whenever funding is happening, like could the trust make those investments?
Your parents are rich, right? So you do it at formation.
Yeah.
Then your parents could put a very small amount of dollars into the trust because on day one, the stock is worth nothing. So the trust can buy a significant amount of equity for nothing. But if you wait until let's say the first funding round, you're doing there's an angel round going on. Now the trust coming in on the angel round, like it's going to pay hopefully a small amount compared to what the stock ultimately sells for. But
it still could be $10 million or $5 million.
Your parents would have to put, $100,000 into the trust and it would become an angel at $100,000. And two things. One, most people don't have parents that are willing to put $100,000 in the trust. And two, that, the founder then or his parents are actually putting real capital at risk, which the founder may not want to do. The founder may be like trying to use other people's money and basically put sweat equity. And so generally we're seeing the GOAT trusts best used on a time when the stock can be valued at nothing or close to nothing.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've thought a little bit about some of the gift trusts or the charitable giving trust because I know that from our company, any liquidity, a portion of that I'm heavily involved in my church. And so a portion of that will go to that community. And so planning around that in terms of sizing it properly, how could that work? For instance, and we'll just get a little bit personal, but that amount for me might be 10 or 15% of whatever liquidity I get. And so is there a way to plan ahead of time so that those numbers work out within that trust? Or how would you think through that if that was the real world situation you were looking at?
Yeah, I think the charitable remainder trust strategy might be like a good one for you because you're required with a charitable remainder trust to give a minimum of 10% to charity. The way that would look is, let's say you are a founder and you were about to have an exit. You would put what you believe will end up being up to $10 million worth of stock into this charitable remainder trust. The trust would be designed to give you payments over the next 5 years or your spouse payments over the next 5 years. And those payments would be calibrated and designed to equal 90%. So effectively, you get $9 million back. If you wanted to give 15% to charity, you could design the payments so you get 85%.
Sure, $8.5 million. Yeah.
And so those payments come back to you as QSBS. So it's another stacking strategy. You're getting, the trust sells the stock and it sends the money back to you and gives you a K1 saying, hey, we sold the stock. We didn't pay tax on it because we're a charitable entity, but it's QSBS because,
Okay.
it was QSBS originally. And then the remainder would go to charity after the 5 years.
So is that also a tool used for stacking, or can someone benefit from that even if they haven't hit the $10 million threshold?
No, you wouldn't. You could do one if you're charitably inclined,
Yeah.
but
The
you
real
only do
benefit.
stacking if you personally are not.
Yeah.
If you're personally going to be over 10 million. If you're under 10 million, you don't need to hire any lawyers or do anything at all. You just sell your stock and pocket the money.
Yeah. With QSBS. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. Understood. This is great. This is great information, Michael. I appreciate it. Running up here on time, but I appreciate the high level overview of opportunities with trust, and especially the GOAT trust. We probably should have led with that. And but that'll certainly be something that we talk to founders about, because a lot of times, being sort of in the maybe like QSBS point guard a little bit, we have people reach out to us at all stages, and they don't always fit the profile of someone to do a rollover. A lot of times we talk to people who are very early, and so that'll become a part of our conversation with them, and passing them over to you to set something like that up at Formation.
I love it. Yeah. We have some information on that on our Founder Focus Resource Center, and I'll send it over to you. And it was a pleasure doing this with you, and I really enjoy doing some business with you. And thanks for setting this up.
Great. Thanks, Michael.
All right.
Thanks for listening to this episode of QSBS Solved. We hope to hear from you soon. Remember that the content shared on QSBS Solved is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal, tax, or investment advice. While we discuss strategies related to qualified small business stock, or QSBS, including rollover planning, listeners should consult their own tax, legal, and financial advisors before making any decisions. Laws and interpretations can change. Individual circumstances do vary. Thanks for listening to this episode of QSBS Solved. We hope to hear from you soon. Remember that the content shared on QSBS Solved is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal, tax, or investment advice. While we discuss strategies related to qualified small business stock, or QSBS, including rollover planning, listeners should consult their own tax, legal, and financial advisors before making any decisions. Laws and interpretations can change. Individual circumstances do vary.